If you give up the knowledge of your customer and part of the customer experience, your ability to recognize and solve your customer problems they're greatly diminished. And if you're not staying on top of that, you're going to find it more and more difficult to differentiate your brand in a crowded market. You're going to lose ground. You're going to lose.
Hello, everyone. You're listening to the Data Unlocked podcast. In this podcast, we explore ways in which data drives creativity and innovation for marketers, and we explore that with the best and brightest in the industry. My name is Jason Davis, founder and CEO of Simon Data, a growth platform driving smart marketing for brands like JetBlue, TripAdvisor, Equinox, and BarkBox. I'm excited today to have our guest, Chris Harrison, CEO of FullContact, on our podcast here today. Thanks for joining us. Chris, if you can maybe tell us a little bit about yourself.
All right. Thank you, Jason. It's a pleasure to have a conversation with you today. As you said, I'm the CEO of FullContact. That's a company that specializes in identity for marketing and advertising, as well as serving the identity verification and fraud sector. I've spent the past 30 years in marketing technology. Prior to FullContact, I was at a company called Epsilon. That's a large marketing services provider. I held various positions over the course of that time, including being an engineer, a data architect, eventually chief technology officer. I was president of the marketing technology division. And now I'm at FullContact. I've been here for about 3 years, and we're creating the foundations for the future of identity within marketing.
Great, Chris. And like myself, we both have technical backgrounds, so it's always great to have another technical CEO on the show. Yeah, really just diving into our big question today. Chris, you and I were speaking, before the episode kicked off, and really one of the things we really just, we're talking about was how everyone talks about the customer 360 and, the views of the customer and how that's empowered by, a next generation of first-party data. But ultimately, really understanding the customer is only as powerful and fundamentally limited by, a brand's ability to understand who the customer is. And identity there really just plays a foundational role. And, I think it's, there are many finer points of this that I think folks really just don't quite get. And, just want to make sure we can dive into that and, get a bit of clarity around what that means for the listeners of our show. So before we sort of get too deep, maybe you can just sort of give us a quick overview around how identity plays a role in building this view of the customer.
All right, thank you. Yeah. So at FullContact, we like to say, own your relationships, own your future. And so identity is at the core of the relationship with your customers. And so without the ability to progressively understand your customer, you will fail to deepen your relationship with that customer. That's just foundational. Over the past decade, we've seen a lot of companies cede, much of their customer experience and thus their knowledge and identity of customers really to these large third parties. And then they pay for the privilege to actually access that information about their customers. And so to me, if you give up the knowledge of your customer and part of the customer experience, your ability to recognize and solve your customer problems they're greatly diminished. And if you're not staying on top of that, you're going to find it more and more difficult to differentiate your brand in a crowded market. You're going to lose ground. You're going to lose. And so really, to a brand, the information about a person is the person to the brand. That is how they know you. That is who you are to that brand. And that's why platforms like Simon Data are important, because you have to have a solid grasp on that first-party data, that information with your customer. We just recognize that a company only has a limited amount of that first-party identity signal from their customers. So FullContact gives companies tools to help them ensure that they can manage that identity, recognize customers, service them better, and do so with high fidelity. And they need good customer recognition, but it isn't new. It's just evolved. Things have changed over time. And if you don't mind, I'll digress just a little bit. A handful of years ago, I was reviewing some old presentations that I did back in the 90s. This was just wild. And so I was reminiscing. And there was a deck that I had presented to a CPG company. If you don't mind, I'm going to read off what I had said. This is 1998. It was for a CPG company. And this was one of the slides. And these were the bullet points of the slides. The very first line said, you have to utilize your customer data. You have to identify your customers to know what customers are, who they are, and what characterizes your best customers. And identifying your customers allows you to immediately react to customers when their engagement's in decline, to know how new customers differ from your existing customer base, to see new areas of opportunity, and to suggest ways of refining your strategy. So that was 25 years ago, almost 25 years ago. It was relevant then. Identifying your customers, understanding it was relevant then. It's even more important now. And so we're in a complex digital economy. Your customers display different behaviors now than they did even 2 years ago. And you have to stay on top of those things. You have to understand their needs and their preferences. And identity resolution plays a key role in allowing you to do just that.
Yep, no, and a stat that we like to use, with some of our customers in sort of the e-commerce spaces, is look at a typical e-commerce brand, might see 60 or 70% of all their sales be from repeat customers. Yet at the same time, and these, of course, if you get to a second sale, then leading up to that, they will be customers that you have known because they made a first sale. At the same time, if you look at authenticated traffic and identifiable traffic on a traditional or typical e-commerce site, numbers are generally below 20%. So there's a big gap there in that majority of the traffic. And these are users. These are either potential customers or existing customers are browsing, they're searching, they're viewing your SKUs and interacting with your product and your content. Yet you're unable to associate them with people who might potentially purchase. And when you can, it's already too late after the purchases happen, and you aren't able to really get in there and understand intent. For those who may not actually have gotten to the end of the road.
That's right. Yeah. I mean, and 60% of them, 60 to 70%, I think is the statistic that you were sharing. I mean, that you don't really know anything about them. I mean, you're not sure why you're not servicing them. I mean, what's happening there? And you might even make false conclusions by looking at the data you do have and assuming that defines the market opportunity for you and your brand.
Yep. So Chris, maybe you can sort of give us a few examples around how, I give a very simple example of the gap, around if you're unable to really understand who your customers are and associate behaviors with historics, what the result can be. But maybe you can give a couple of examples around what can be unlocked with smarter identity resolution and some of the great stuff that you guys are doing at FullContact.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I'll give you a couple examples. I mean, I'll start with one of the big challenges. So one of the big identity challenges that has persisted within marketing for a long time is the ability to identify trends or even make immediate reactions to behavior to respond with the next best marketing message or offer. And so here's just an example where that can go wrong. So, imagine you're a retailer and you have customers purchasing fringe dresses, barrel jeans. And by the way, I don't even know what these things are, but apparently very trendy fashions. I'm not the trendiest fashion person in the world, but they are. And you have ways to identify these individuals typically, because they're purchasing things. You're shipping them things. And so you at least have like a shipping label. You most likely have an email address because they're going to ask you, they're going to say, hey, update me on the shipping of these items, et cetera. So this retailer, they develop a nice view of the characteristics of their customers. They start to look at these identities. They begin overlaying other characteristics, behaviors, doing lookalike modeling with other people who are purchasing. But within their analysis, something really interesting pops out. They start to analyze the people making these purchases, these very trendy fashions. They discover the segment is dominated by people in the age range of 45 to 54. So that's interesting because these are trendy, as I said, apparently. And this is not their target audience for this clothing line. So now the retailer has to make a decision, right? Because most of their marketing is tailored to that 18 to 34 demographic. And they have some questions to answer. So should they, change their content immediately or adapt it on their website to tailor more to this 54-year-old? Should they change their broader strategy, incorporate more inventory that aligns to that age group? I mean, these are really big decisions and costly decisions if you make a mistake. And when an audience this large, almost half of the purchases were in this demographic of 45 to 54, that's a big shift. It's in terms of their doing business. So long story short, what's really happening here is there's a young adult living in that household. So in fact, 52% of young adults are living with their parents right now. That's the highest rate since the Great Depression. And we're starting to see this. We started to see it right after the Great Recession. And then it really accelerated during the pandemic. So that's what's really going on. But if the retailer had a few more signals to help identify their customers, they'd realize that the email given with that shipping update actually belonged to the same person that signed up for a newsletter under a different email address. And they know that these two email addresses actually belong to a 25-year-old young woman. And the shipping address was really her parents. And so they're misattributing the identity. So that household's made up of parents, young adults, which is very typical now. And the issue is they just don't have the identity signal to connect these dots. And without connecting the dots, you can make some big decisions based on poor identity attribution. And that's what we can help with as a company, because we monitor billions of these identity signals, and we can help fill in the identity gaps. So I'll give you one more quick example. We work with a social cause organization, and they wanted to recognize people online so that they can immediately guide that individual, the visitor, to a local chapter website. Do that in real time. But the big caveat, they wanted to protect the personally identifiable information. They wanted to make sure that they were protecting that information and securing that information. And the reason is because storing and managing identity information can be a risk. That data can spread or unintentionally be leaked. And they wanted to de-risk the storage of that sensitive data, and they want to replace it with what we call a person ID. So they ask us to do that for them. What we do is we put aside an encrypted copy of that sensitive data, replace it, put it inside what we call a private identity cloud, replace it with a non-reversible person ID. And non-reversible just basically means you can't get back to the identity of that individual by analyzing the ID itself. There's nothing sensitive in that ID. It's the brand's ID. They can store it anywhere. They can combine information with it, perform analysis, share it with partners, et cetera. So we help them keep that identity persistent, translate it when they need to activate it by onboarding it to other platforms or even through clean room activities with partners. And they don't have to touch any of the sensitive data. But they're still gathering insights, recognizing people in real time, and facilitating advertising on behalf of their chapters. It's a win-win. So those are a couple examples of how identity resolution plays a critical role.
Yeah, no, those are great examples. I think across householding and just smarter identification, there's just a tremendous amount of complexity here and real value when applied correctly. I'm sure the question that everyone is asking now, how does it work? Maybe you can just give a glimpse, into the machine, into the databases that you guys powered. I know there's a tremendous amount of complexity that we will not be able to cover in our short episode today, but maybe just a bit of insight and tinkle folks' intuition around how this might be affected.
Yeah, no worries. So FullContact is all about identity. We spend every waking hour in some dreams, in fact, working on identity problems. And so this is what we're all about as a company. So we help resolve the identity of a customer either in real time or through bulk sets of data. And we do that to make sure that you can identify your customers within your four walls, of the brand itself, and also outside your four walls when you need to actually activate that data in other platforms. So we help you manage both sides of that equation. The basics of our services really entail identity resolution, and I'll explain what that is in a minute. Safeguarding identity and what we call within a private identity cloud. That's our term for that. And then helping you connect to other platforms or enrichment providers that can tell you more about your customer. And so the fundamental part of our business is what we call identity resolution. So identity resolution is the ability to recognize an individual person in real time through various identifiers or fragments of identity based on their interactions with your company. And identity resolution links all those interactions to the individual that's engaging with your company. And by linking all of those separate interactions to that person, you get a holistic view of their engagement with your brand. And you can create more of a personalized experience and serve them better. So that's identity resolution. So behind that, the tech behind identity resolution, there's really two main components. There's an identity graph, and there's sophisticated resolution algorithms that sit on top of that graph. So what a graph is, so a graph, if you think back, you've heard people talk about social graphs and other kind of graphs. They're basically nodes and edges. And an identity graph, at least on our side, how we think of this is it's made up of identifiers matched with privacy protected people profiles. So you can think of it like billions of contact fragments, names and IDs and transactions, et cetera, with connections between all of them. And then these clusters of those fragments, of those connections, actually represent a person that gets formed within the graph itself. And that's what the algorithms do. They provide the sophistication to really know how to read the data, know what's signal and what's not within all of those. So we see billions of these identity fragments or identifiers. They're attached to these profiles, and each of them, in terms of their relationship with each other, have various degrees of certainty. And then we apply that certainty on the edge of that graph. And we call that, a trust or a belief vector in terms of the relationship between two of these fragments. And that makes up an individual when you have a high enough belief in all of these things being related to an individual. We turn the observation of all this information basically that we see into signal, and then we translate the signal into a representation of a person. And that's what identity resolution is. And then we use it, to help customers. We help them maintain privacy and security around identity, translate that into other identity standards, including connecting them to enrichment partners that we have that tell you more about your customer. And that's helpful because one brand, one company, when you're trying to interact with your customers, you're at a disadvantage because you just don't get to see the full picture and be able to fill in the gaps of identity. And we want to give that power back to brands so that they can have more control over their customer relationships.
No, that's great and super helpful. And as some of our listeners may know, Simon and FullContact, work fairly closely together. At a high level, really the value that we bring to our customers really comes in thinking about all the powerful inference that you just described, Chris, and really just put it within the context of our application. How do you really make sure that when you actually build hypersegments, when you drive one-to-one personalization, when you execute, cross-channel, that you're really doing so with the full view of the customer. And that includes all the details around customer identity, such that when you bring that together across behavioral, historical, transactional, et cetera, and more first-party, data and beyond, you're able to build, the most precise, accurate, and comprehensive, sort of marketing programs. But maybe you can talk a bit more about how it actually just plugs together, and maybe a bit more broadly around how identity plays a role in CDPs and partners like ours, Chris.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, very excited to be working with Simon Data. All the capabilities I just explained that I just went through in terms of identity resolution and securing and, in a privacy safe way, data as well, and connecting to enrichment partners, all those things. Basically, all of that we want to make available to Simon Data customers. And we want to work in tandem with Simon Data to help companies stay in sync with their customers through the first party experiences that you have. I mean, first party data, and the consented data that's shared with your company is the most important data you have to personalize the customer experience. But we know that, as in the examples that I mentioned, improper attribution of first-party data to the wrong identity or to even not recognize the customer at all can have dire consequences to the brand. And so we want to help companies improve through, identity resolution. And Simon Data is amazing at accelerating the time to market for marketing communications and making it easier for marketers to collate, make use of their first-party data. And I think that's paramount for any company to survive now. It's absolutely critical infrastructure. FullContact just wants to assist by giving more power back to the brands, like I mentioned, giving them sophisticated tools to manage identity in combination with the CDP in order to deepen that customer relationship and just make it easier for them to do so at high fidelity. So put it another way, CDPs help break down silos within your company. And FullContact has really helped bind the data together at the person level. And I think that's where everything comes together. It's a great combination. And the other thing I'll mention, and before we wrap up, is that the data supply chain is evolving quickly. And it's very difficult for a brand to develop in-house everything that's necessary to stay up to speed on relevant marketing technology. And so, there's evolving tech around privacy and security safe ways to share information with partners and ways to de-risk your data assets. And there are great platforms that make your data usable, like Simon Data. But for brands, to try to develop or even stitch together all of this is daunting. So They don't have to. Simon Data has made that easy for them. And you don't have to staff a team of engineers or pay millions of dollars to build your own identity spine. We've done that for you. We built the corpus of knowledge and the algorithms. You just need to tap into it, no messy integrations and no large capital outlay.
Yeah, no, and it's a great point. And I think a quick plug for, in episode 2 or 3 episodes ago now, had Bill Stratton from Snowflake on the line. And we were talking about the data supply chain and their vision, around how Snowflake can extend, into third-party data, into algorithms and algorithmic, providers like you guys, and then also be activated through applications like ours. So, 100%. When I look at the rapid innovation that's happening across data today and data infrastructure and into the applications here, I think the world of drawing a box around a single provider and solving all your problems are somewhat behind us.
Yeah, absolutely great. And go back and listen to that episode. It was a great episode with them. And Snowflake's a great company, and we enjoy working with them. And they're one of those examples that I'm mentioning here of evolving technology around this new way that we're going to market around first party data and first party relationships, and the ability to extend those to second parties. And great episode. Go back and check that one out after you listen to this one.
That's great. So we're about at the end of our time here today, Chris. First, I just want to thank you for coming on the podcast today and sharing your wisdom with us. Really, when I reflect on our conversation, it's really about this next generation of how data can be applied to transform the customer experience, and it's really about thinking around how to leverage third-party data, how to leverage algorithmic intelligence and predictive intelligence, and then how to apply it in the right way. When I look at our partnership, it really comes down to 2 distinct components. One is this very high, powerful and higher order inference that can really understand the identity of customers at a very specific and an accurate way. And then on the other side, is a very flexible way of activating that. Again, the opportunity to actually do something with the data is only as powerful as the pipes downstream that can actually affect it for segmentation and beyond. And when I look at our partnership, it really is sort of a 1 + 1 greater than 2 situation. We could have, and we looked at trying to build some of this technology ourselves, and we quickly realized that folks like FullContact and you guys, I think, are really top in the category. Can really just do a far superior job around what you do, and we put all of our focus into building the most flexible way of representing the identity. Once we have it, if someone has multiple identifiers across push providers or SMS or email or cookies or whatever that might be, we can in a very intelligent way juggle that and really just unleash the insights and the intelligence that the providers like you guys can bring to the table. So with that, I'm just tremendously excited about what's to come, and for our customers who are already seeing value from the stuff that we've been doing so far. So with this, Chris, maybe you can speak for a quick second about how our listeners today can learn more about FullContact and your services.
Yeah, go to FullContact.com. We'd love to talk to you. And we'd love to share some of the experiences we've had in the identity space and problems we've solved. And we can talk about the partnership with Simon Data as well, and how you can make the data that you have, the first party data that you have within Simon Data, either help you make it better or help you engage your customers in a deeper way. And so own your relationships and own your future.
Great. And thank you to everyone listening to this episode of the Data Unlocked podcast. And if you'd like to learn more about Simon Data, please visit us on the web at simondata.com or email us at hello@simondata.com.